Hello, I'm Robin Ince, and here is a chunk of our 9 lessons of carols for socially distanced people. Normally, 9 lessons of carols for curious people. Hopefully in 2021, we'll be back in front of a live audience. This year, we had 30,000 people watching us across the world. And this section of the show, we had some wonderful things. We had Jim Al-Khalili, who is always so great at explaining the wonderful and intricate and sometimes seemingly absurd ideas of physics. We had Mark Watson explaining to me what doing a 24-hour show really does to you. The brilliant musician Gecko, and also Rebecca Wragg-Sykes talking about what is undoubtedly one of my favourite science books of the year. I hope you enjoy it.
Now, we've got one of the reasons that we're doing this show, someone who basically started off the 24-hour shows. And I don't know if every single time that he does them again, he did one only about a month or so ago, whether he rused the day when probably 15 years ago or so he came up with it. Let's find out. We're going to go to Mark Watson. Hello, Mark. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, in that case, things are going well. I'm all right, thanks, Robin, but I'm not the one this time having to do this, am I?
Well, how long did it take you? The last one was what? It was back in November, wasn't it? The last 24?
Yeah, Halloween weekend, in fact. Yeah, spooky date. So it went through the last day of October.
And I remember, am I right in saying the first time that you did this, I think it was a 48-hour show at the Edinburgh Fringe, wasn't it?
I started with a 24-hour show very long time ago now, 15 years ago, and then I gradually inched my way up to 36 was the limit, actually, a day and a half, which, with hindsight, was quite long. I'd say 24 is sort of, I've come to see it as the optimum length of a comedy show.
See, I tried out about 20 years ago. I did hosted a cult movie weekend at the Prince Charles Cinema in London. And I found it, and I stayed up for 52 hours, which I think is the longest that I've ever done.
That's unpleasant, yeah.
It was ridiculous, and I think the damage still shows very much on the skin and beyond.
You've never quite been the same since mentally or physically, no.
But if only that were true, I was as depleted when I began as when I finished.
That's a good excuse.
But what do you find, especially when you're actually, I mean, it's different, I think, this year when you're doing it from home, and also you're so close to your bed. But when you're stood on stage at the Edinburgh Fringe, when do you hit that first real slump where you think, my brain is no longer able to function as a performer?
Again, like you, I've had my brain say that for quite long periods of my life anyway. So in a sense, you might as well embrace the madness of a 24-hour show. I tend to find, and it might be similar for you, that I can hear you've got some people there. I'm not sure how many people are in the room with you, but a lot depends on them, basically. The audience's collective will to keep going, transmits to you, and when they start to flag is when you start to flag, I think. So what that means is, and you're starting sort of early in the day and going through. I always start late at night so that we can plough through those very dark hours while people are still relatively fresh. So I tend to find that midnight, if you say you start at midnight, or the late hours into maybe 6 or 7, through to about sunrise, surprisingly all right. So 8 or 9 hours, I think, is fine. When you can start to flag, I think, is when, certainly in my shows, daylight comes and it hits you that you've been doing it for a very long time, and yet you were still nowhere near halfway. And there's another bit like that, a couple of hours after halfway, where you think, I'm actually fairly tired and the show has lost momentum, but there still is about 10 hours to go. As long as you can either look at the halfway point or a finish line or some landmark, you're fine. I think the dangerous bits are bits where you're between obvious landmarks and you're having to tell yourself things like, well, in just an hour and 27 minutes, we've got a vague promise of an accordion solo, but we don't know if he is coming yet. Those bits can be challenging.
I like the fact that you've waited until now to say, oh, just so you know, I wouldn't have started when you've started. You've started off with an error.
Yeah, I think you've thrown away the first 11 hours atmosphere-wise. No, I always ask myself if it would be better to start. I'm going to be interested to hear how the experience is for you, actually, because with those 36-hour ones, I did start when you were starting and then went all the way to midnight the next day. And that, I think for some reason, psychologically, I like the idea of building towards nighttime as the finish line. But there might well be advantages to the way you're doing it, which we'll discover. This is sort of, you're advancing the general science of marathon shows. This is good field work.
See, I like the stunts because I remember when doing the Prince Charles thing, there was a point where Peter Graham from the wonderful King's Head Comedy Club, which is one of the longest running comedy clubs, I got a message from him saying, I've just had someone pull out of a gig. Can you do it? I said, well, I'm introducing the Long Good Friday at 9:15. I can then get in a cab, do a set, and as long as I'm back by 10:45 to say that was the Long Good Friday, and that excitement of a different set of adrenaline going, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the film. Diddle-dum, diddle-dum, diddle-dum. Hey, King's Head, how you doing? Diddle-dum, good night. And that was kind of, that gave me a burst. Whereas those moments, like as you said, I think for those who suffer from insomnia, as you were talking about the dawn, there is nothing more ugly, and it's such a terrible thing, the ugliness of birdsong to an insomniac, that when they start, oh, now it's you as well. And I know it's not even a thing of beauty. I know it's some kind of sex thing that you're up to as well. I hate you, blackbirds.
It's true, there's a lot of poetry and songs and stuff about the beauty of the dawn, but you don't see so much stuff about the times you wake up and it's dawn, you think, oh, for fuck's sake, dawn. Someone should write a poem with that title, I think. So I think basically, and you're right, by the way, quite often it is about a change of scene for you. Like I used to, during my Edinburgh ones, I would sometimes have to do my regular show as part of it, and that involved dashing across town with 100 people, installing them, coming back, all this sort of nonsense. One year I did one where we were perpetually in motion around the city of Edinburgh for the 24 hours, which was began as loads of fun, and then it was pretty much dreadful experience for everyone. But since you're stuck where you are physically, I think it's about psychological changes of scene, changing the tone a bit. Also, I think it's important to just embrace the fact that sometimes everyone will be quite tired and sad, and that's not a problem. That's just part of the natural rhythm. You haven't lost it forever. There are just some bits where you will have to collectively. That's what tends to happen in the live 24-hour shows. It doesn't happen so much the two that I've done online because, for a start, people are free to sort of leave and rest and sleep in their own times in their own house. But when you're all trapped together in a building, as I have been for most of these shows, I find it's useful to just admit to the audience sometimes, well, everyone seems knackered and nothing is really working. So we'll just sit it out for a few minutes. You can't be very good for 24 hours, but you can sort of, sometimes, as with comedy as a whole, it's about survival.
So there will be a moment when I turn to Steve and say, Steve, could you just play John Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds and play an extended version for a while?
Yeah, would you do a medley of that and that film of Andy Warhol's where it's just one shot and nothing happens for a bit? Yeah. I think that's fine. That's normal. It's normal. And you're lucky to have Steve there. It is very handy to have musicians and people with, no disrespect to you or me, but people with actual palpable talent are quite handy in these situations.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's no disrespect to you or me, but it's entirely true. We've learned nothing, haven't we? It's just terrible. I wish you hadn't told me that so early. Normally, this is a moment of private melancholy that I have dwelling over the pointlessness of my career, but you brought it up so early.
Sorry, I should normally run through my head quite early in a 24-hour show, so I feel I should transmit that neurosis to you since you're carrying the baton.
In terms of the shows that you've done when you actually do it with a live audience, there must have been moments where, because I know there's been special treats where, for instance, Gillian Anderson someone arranged for, so just as you were flagging, and she's fantastic. I mean, she was, if anyone saw the play version of All About Eve, she's absolutely amazing. But suddenly, so you had this moment, you think, I can't go on, and then Gillian Anderson turns up.
Yeah, and actually, that wasn't even a moment when I couldn't go on. It was about 2 hours into that show. She was a surprise arrival. So if anything, I could have done with Anderson about 17 hours later, really. But as they say, famously, you don't know when you're going to get Anderson. That's what my mum told me years ago, and she was right. Yeah, I think, no doubt you will have people unexpectedly popping in and things as well. I mean, you've got quite a lot of people expectedly popping in. The roll call behind you is enormous. With the 24-hour shows, my ones don't tend to be quite as tightly structured as that, despite the wonders of Isabel Adams. So it must be reassuring to you to look at the sheer volume of brains behind you.
Yeah, no, Trent and Melinda and everyone involved is incredible. But it's just that worry that you go, oh no, at 3 a.m. I'm talking to Eric Idle, and that's when I'm normally at my most incomprehensible, and I don't want to show myself up in front of a python, not again.
Is that true, or just an example you pulled out of nowhere?
Oh no, Eric's going to be at 3 a.m.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well,
he's already seen that I can't dance, so now we can find out something. That's the problem, isn't it? The only thing we really are able to do, Mark, is we're able to talk, and once that's removed from us, something like 15 hours in, you go, no skill set, no xylophone playing, nothing.
That's right. You're also quite similar to me in that you talk way more than you probably have to per hour. You cram in more actual words and thoughts than you. Some people in our situation would probably pace themselves a bit in the opening hours. But I've been watching you for the bulk of it, and you've gone at it hell for leather exactly as I do at the start. So yeah, we're the equivalent of people who don't just run a marathon, but like sprint over the start line. And unfortunately, that's just both how we are temperamentally. So you probably will hit these walls where you think, I've been going like the clappers for 11 hours. But sometimes having someone like Eric Idle in the middle of the night is the fact you can't really prepare for it mentally is sort of the point, I think. You'll be in a very strange headspace. And maybe that is the best way to meet a python.
That is, now you've mentioned the marathon, that famous footage of that man who you just see going, and you think, that's me. That's going to be me. That is what you've been. What have been for you the standout moments in terms of something, again, say 20 hours in, where you create, because I think that's what's been very beautiful about a lot of your shows is things are performed that will only ever be performed in that scenario. It's like the best kind of festival where there's just such a freedom. And there must be, of the moments of creativity on stage, what have been the peak moments for you?
Yeah, it's true. The point of the shows for me always is to make some sort of meaningful experience for people out of a series of absolutely arbitrary events, which again, you could argue is what all of our career is really. But it's brought home to you how arbitrary it is when you're getting everyone to just cheer the mention of a duck or something. I think a good example of it in recent times was we had somebody, the last one I did live in a theatre was for charity, and various people did sort of micro 24-hour long challenges in the audience. And there was one person who was just drawing pictures of Bradley Walsh, the mainstream entertainer, for the whole 24 hours. Bradley Walsh in this position, in that position, in this situation. They weren't particularly a fan of Bradley Walsh's. It was the definition of a meaningless task. They just set themselves. They were a good artist. Izzy name was, and of course it became a storyline because they gradually became more and more demented from the experience of drawing Bradley Walsh. Actually, it was for Dementia Revolution, so I probably shouldn't have used that pejoratively. They went more crazy as it went on, and so it became a talking point. Are you still drawing Bradley Walsh? Are you okay? And just as you said, about 20 hours in, there was a surprise Skype call. I wasn't even told. I was just asked to look behind me, and there was Walsh on the big screen. On his way back from some TV thing, he had a bottle of old moat cider or like some crappy looking cider. He was in the back of an Uber. He had no idea what was going on. He'd just been told that someone had been compulsively sketching him for 20 hours. And not that Walsh hasn't had an illustrious career, but the response in that room when his face appeared on screen was like nothing he will have ever seen before, I don't think. And of course, the artist was much more emotional than she should have been looking at the face of Bradley Walsh. And that was a good example of how what seems a pretty pointless quest when you begin it. It wasn't even a quest. At no point did we say, or we did, maybe we said it'd be great to get Bradley Walsh in, but we didn't really set out to do that. It just became, he became a sort of motif of obsession. And I think that is part of it. You'll find that things develop over the show which you can't yet predict, which become obsessions. And then a very small thing, like the appearance of someone, or even just a video message, or someone showing up at the theatre with whatever it is, will trigger disproportionate emotional responses because they're the only things that matter in the world that you've created.
I love that. I love that whole image. Just the idea of a comic book writer. It's like Alan Moore. Why did Alan Moore end up writing a novel that was longer than the Old Testament? Well, I spent a whole weekend with Mark Watson just writing different scenarios involving Joe Pasquale, and one thing led to another.
That's right. Anytime you hear somebody doing a really stupidly long thing, then I'm in it somewhere. It's my fault. I mean, I've never met Alan Moore, but I like to think that's what happened.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Mark. And I should mention Matt Kemp, who we're going to be going to quite soon, is also, who is a brilliant illustrator and cartoonist, is again, cartooning through the whole of the 25 hours that we're doing this.
Get him drawing Walsh at some point.
So, yeah, we will, if you want to, maybe we should see if Matt, I don't know if he'll take various different requests of anyone who has presented a daytime quiz show, TV show. We'll so you can go with your Osmond, your Alexander Armstrong, any of those kind of things. Susan Cowman, he may well perhaps place daytime quiz show hosts in an interesting but PG-rated scenario. Thank you very much, Mark Watson. Hopefully, if you want to turn up again at 11:45 tomorrow morning, let's see who has been more destroyed. You're a younger man than I.
I actually would love to. I'd love to do that. I'd love to pop in. So you finish at 12 noon.
About 12:35. Yeah.
35. I'll definitely check in at some point in the morning and try and chiver you along over those final few hours if it helps, if it's needed. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Mark has a new novel out as well, and it's fantastic. So go and look up Mark's books, but the new novel is absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark.
Good luck with the next enormous amount of time.
Right, I'm going to move here because I need to be able to see this screen, one of the screens, I think. And we're going to move into some physics now. And this is going to be I'm not sure if we've got a physicist in the last 6 hours of the show, but that will be very interesting to find out how adept I am at receiving ideas of quantum cosmology at about 7 a.m. But we'll find out. I'm not normally adept at any particular time. But we're going to go now over live to Jim Al-Khalili. Hello, Jim. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm good. Jim, we've got now your new book has been I noticed you tweeted yesterday it's now been translated into its 18th language.
Yeah, doing very well, considering people aren't going out to bookshops and buying it, of course.
Now, what is this is I find interesting in terms of the language of physics. Is there anything which becomes hard to translate? Because I've heard, it sometimes culturally, with when it can seem very abstract, some of the ideas of physics are the points where you go, this is really hard to find the language, how to change the language to understand this particular theory.
I guess you'd have to ask my translators. I mean, the books come out in other languages and I get sent sort of, a few complimentary copies. They sit up on my shelf. I don't know if you can see them. My shelf behind me here. This is my upstairs study with all my copies of my own book. I mean, it's really very modest of me. But I've no idea if the translations are true to what I've been trying to get across or not. I mean, certainly I work hard at trying to get complicated science complex across in plain English. I'm just sort of hoping that the translators are doing a similarly good job on their end.
Right, well, let's find out. We've got some questions that have been sent in. If you have got questions, if we've got more time, hopefully we will, tweet them to Cosmic Shambles, #9lessons24. Now, this is an interesting thing because with Brian, I find that the maximum questions we can do in 20 minutes is 2. And you know this from when we did a show at Hammersmith where you answer more, but Brian would always go, and of course at that point that's when the interaction will cease. But one of the other things that I find really beautiful about it is, so now let's see how many you can get through. This first one's from Alistair, Jim. So Alistair's question is, given recent leaps in AI problem solving, such as DeepMind solution to protein folding, which unsolved problems would be fun for AI to look at next?
Well, unsolved problems in physics are the ones that I would find most fun. And I guess, we have these big mysteries still in physics. What is the nature of dark matter, dark energy? I think the ultimate challenge will be if AI can help us find a theory of everything. We've been struggling for a century almost now, trying to unify all the laws of nature, all the forces, and come up with a theory you can wear, equation you can wear on a T-shirt. And it's just so blinking hard. So I think we're going to have to appeal to AI to solve this problem. I'm half expecting, there'll be some press announcement from DeepMind saying our latest AI algorithm has just found the theory of quantum gravity and sorted. That will be, I don't know, I'd be slightly disappointed that it wasn't our stupid human brains that figured it out, but it would be fun if an AI could come up with an equation like that.
Well, I'll ask a little bit about that theory of everything. I was talking to Carlos Frank, who's based up in Durham, who's a fantastic mind. And he explained for the first time that bit where when we don't know how the universe began, is it Planck time up? Is it 10 to the minus 37 of a second? Is that right?
It's a blink of an eye.
But what I'd never thought of is the fact that actually in that point, it's not really 10 to the minus 37 of a second in the way that we measure time, because it might be a period of timelessness. This is before space. Now that to me, because this is the problem, isn't it, theory of everything, is you kind of, which is matching up quantum theory when we get to the very small of the universe with also the nature of gravity.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the problem. So the Big Bang is a point at which we have to use quantum theory and we have to use relativity theory, Einstein's theory of gravity. In the middle of a black hole is exactly where you've got to use both theories. So there are scenarios or situations where you have to put them both together. I mean, if you just use Einstein's relativity, the Big Bang idea of, what was there before the Big Bang, it's not easy to understand, but it's sort of logical, because it's the same as saying if you were to walk to the South Pole And when you get to the South Pole, keep walking south. It's nonsense, right? Because any step you take from the South Pole will take you back north again. So Einstein's idea was, and people like Stephen Hawking, was that that's what the Big Bang is. There is no time before the Big Bang. It just doesn't exist to embed the word before in. But once you bring quantum mechanics in, things start to get a bit fuzzier, and things start to get, people are almost now starting to talk about, well, maybe the Big Bang wasn't the beginning of time. Maybe it's just the beginning of time in our universe. And there are lots of other bubble universes floating about. There's lots all to play for, as we say.
It's that's the beautiful thing, isn't it? It's really always exciting times in science, not just physics. There's always new things. As we've said before, there's never going to be a point where someone says, wow, that's science finished. What are we going to do next? Matt Masters would like to know, what's the smallest thing we can see or image with instruments with any wavelength of the spectrum before we have to resort to theory or indirect detection to know it's there?
Well, we have instruments called electron microscopes, and there are different types of electron microscopes, and they can image individual atoms. Now, you don't see an atom, like the miniature solar system, like the cartoon you draw at school. What you see is sort of wavy behavior, usually on the surface of metals. But what you're seeing is the probability of atoms being in a certain place, probability of electron clouds existing around the atoms. So in an indirect way, we are looking at atoms and we are looking at the electrons around the atomic nucleus. That is the furthest we can go. We're not using light to see them, so because the wavelength of light, even the highest energy light, if you get smaller wavelength of light, you have to have higher and higher energy light. So once you get to sort of gamma rays, well, you can't use it like you would in a microscope, because it just destroys whatever it is you're looking at. So you have to use other means. But I'd say down to the structure of atoms, not the atomic nucleus yet, that's much, much smaller. That's pretty much the limit we can observe in an experiment.
Right, next one's from Indigo Snow, who would like to know, if time is possibly an illusion, why do we appear to all experience the same linearity?
This is the topic of a research proposal I'm currently writing. In fact, I've got on my other screen, I'm writing this research grant.
So you are Indigo Snow.
I am, indeed. It's still a mystery. The arrow of time, why does it point from the past to the future? Because the three, I talk about this in my book, the three big pillars of physics. We've got Einstein's relativity, we've got quantum mechanics, we've also got thermodynamics. Now, that's the area of physics that says time has a direction. You can't unstir the milk from your coffee. You can't unbreak an egg. Things move in a certain direction. But you don't get that things moving in a certain direction in the other two theories, in relativity or in quantum mechanics. So that's another reason for trying to unify the laws of physics, because we still don't understand how time has an arrow, how it has a direction. How does that all fit together? We're no closer to understanding the nature of time than I guess, the ancient Greeks were, really.
It is one of the idea of the block universe, which of course is that beautiful letter that Einstein wrote to is it Bessower, the widow of?
Yes, the widow of a colleague of his. Yes, trying to cheer her up. Well, not cheer her up, but saying that all time coexists, and so don't mourn too much because he exists. The past is just as real as the present, which is just as real as the future. All times are frozen in this block universe.
Yeah, it's very. And again, I mentioned Alan Moore before. This is one of many reasons I say read the book Jerusalem, because he was hugely inspired by ideas of the block universe. It is quite a remarkable achievement. Murray Chapman would like to know, what's the latest in quantum biology? Of course, you co-wrote a book about quantum biology.
Yeah. It's very interesting. It's still a controversial subject. So we're used to quantum physics, quantum chemistry, so studying the nature of matter down at the level of atoms and molecules. But in biology, it's still quite new, it's still controversial. So that we believe there are now, there's evidence, experimental evidence, that inside living cells, there are certain processes that go on, like the way enzymes make and break large biomolecules, that wouldn't work were it not for quantum mechanics giving it a helping hand. And by quantum mechanics, I mean the really counterintuitive particles being in two places at once, distant particles, quantum entangled and talking to each other. All the weird stuff looks like it could well be happening inside living cells. So the theory is being developed, and that's the sort of stuff that I'm working on. it's really hard to do experiments, because in a physics lab, you can isolate individual atoms or photons of light and, use lasers, and you do it all in a vacuum near absolute zero. You can tweak the dials of your experiment and control what you're looking at. But you can't do that very easily inside a living cell when you've got so much else going on. So it's a real challenge to find the confirming evidence for some of these ideas. And I think to that extent, quantum biology remains slightly speculative.
Next question is from Chris, who says, has lockdown been good for theoretical physics? More time to sit around and just think? Because that's what you do, isn't it, really, generally?
Pretty much. I mean, I hate to say it, but it probably has. My students, my PhD students might argue that they would, quite rightly, prefer to be face-to-face and scribbling equations on blackboards and whiteboards, and that interaction that is more difficult to do over Zoom, which is how we've been working over the last year. But yeah, for theoretical physics, if you haven't got to go into a lab and do an experiment, if you don't have to do stuff as part of a team, if what you're doing is scribbling equations or writing computer code, then I hate to say it, lockdown has been pretty ideal for that. So, some new ideas will be coming out because of a silver lining to the whole mess of 2020.
But I think that bit of finding some kind of optimism in what can be a very, pessimistic situation. I mean, I've certainly found there was a point where in the attic room where I do all my work, and I just looking at the same square of sky out of that window and really getting a sense of kind of, human connection. It was something very positive. I'd never looked at just one square of sky every single night. And to observe, dawn and to observe dusk and to just see its changes. There was a sense of connection that could be achieved in what was at other times a very different time.
I agree. We're starting to take more notice of the world around us, and I think we're starting to appreciate stuff that we just, our lives are too hectic and too fast and here, there and everywhere, and suddenly we've calmed down and we have time to reflect and time to think and time to appreciate what we have around us. Yeah, I agree.
Let's see if we can get to the last two questions. One is, will the Large Hadron Collider ever be replaced, and if so, by what? So what is the next stage?
Well, there are lots of plans already for something bigger and grander than the Large Hadron Collider. People are, there's different kind of colliders. You can either have particles going around in a circle, for which you need, bigger and bigger magnets to bend them round the more energy you want to put into it. Or you can have linear colliders, things just moving from A to B. Again, they have to be very long. So there's talk of these larger colliders that will take the energy of the collisions even higher, but they're so hugely expensive, and scientists are finding it harder to justify. Because the Large Hadron Collider hasn't found anything really big since the Higgs boson, it's a more difficult case to make, to say we need to spend X billion dollars on an even bigger collider. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see, what happens. Nothing's going to happen in the next few years, but maybe over the next decade or two, there'll be new plans.
And because we've only got a minute left, I'll just give you a nice light question to end on. Oscar would like to know, why is there something rather than nothing?
Well, Einstein wrote a book called Relativity in 1916 in German, translated into English, and he added appendices to it throughout his life. And the last appendix he added, Appendix 5, really covers this and says, how come this space exists and time exists? Einstein would say space and time are the gravitational field. We can't have matter and energy without space and time. We can't have space and time without matter and energy. So all of them have to, you have to buy into all of it at the same time. There could be a nothing, there could be no universe, but that's a rather boring thing to talk about. Nothing. But as soon as you have something, you have to have everything.
Brilliant, thank you. So, I mean, that's the interesting thing, is as other people are kind of, who says nothing is easier than something? Nothing might be much harder than something. That's
absolutely.
Jim, thank you so much, and remind us of your new book.
Keep going. You look very fresh. Only one and a bit hours in, so let's see how you look this time. Well, almost this time tomorrow.
Well done on your book, and well done. You getting nominated as well for, of course, the Royal Society Prize as well, which was an incredible lineup of books this year. It was really fantastic. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jim Al-Khalili.
Thank you very much.
And hopefully we are still bang on time. And as I mentioned this person already, as I said, one of my favourite books, Jim's book, is absolutely fantastic. There's this book about Neanderthals, kindred, Rebecca Wragg-Sykes. So now I'm going to throw over to present a few of the ideas of Neanderthal with musical interludes, Rebecca Wragg-Sykes.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Wragg-Sykes. I am the author of a book just out this year, Kindred, there it is, Neanderthal Life, Love, Death and Art. So what I want to do is give you a very brief whistle-stop myth-busting introduction to Neanderthals through a rather primary school vibed carol and Christmassy music kind of theme. So here we go. So that is, perhaps you might not recognise that, that's actually a hymn. That's a hymn that's a few hundred years old. And the connection is, it was written by a guy called Joachim Neander. So he was a German composer from the 1600s, and he was very, very popular and loved a valley near Dusseldorf, which it turned out much later in the 19th century was the place where the first recognised Neanderthal fossil came from. And the sort of the funny serendipitous thing is that the valley was named after him, so the Neanderthal. But his name, Neander, was a classicised version of the German Neumann, both of which mean new man. So the first place where we recognised that there was another kind of ancient human was the Neumann Valley. Amazing. So, but that was not the first discovered Neanderthal fossil. Next song. Okay, so the one before that was found, it's actually the second, was found in 1848 in Gibraltar. And it was discovered from Forbes quarry, so it's known now as the Forbes skull. It was the first face that we actually saw, the first complete skull of a Neanderthal. But it wasn't really recognised as being anything that significant till rather later. It was given into the care of the Gibraltar Military Garrison Scientific Society. But it was not until 1863 that a visiting doctor who was there with VIPs was given a tour of the garrison's library on Christmas Eve. So the skull may not have been in the library, but he certainly saw it on this tour, possibly in another building, because very soon after that he got in contact with sort of big intellectuals in Britain who he knew very well, one of which was George Busk, who had done the English translation of the German articles for the Neanderthal discovery. And so the Gibraltar skull was shipped over to Britain and met with much fanfare, and even Charles Darwin saw this incredible fossil and thought that it was wonderful. So next. So now we can get on to sort of myth busting a little bit about Neanderthals. Okay, so Neanderthals, very much in most people's minds associated with extreme cold, very intense Arctic climates, and absolutely they did live through periods of time when it was like this. But the span of time over which they existed, more than 300,000 years, covers multiple phases of climate change. So there was never just one big ice age, and in fact they lived during cold periods, but they also lived during periods of time that we call interglacials rather than glacials. And so this might be as warm as it is today, or even warmer. So around 123,000 years ago, it was between 2 to 4 degrees warmer than it is right now, and Neanderthals were still there. So in that sense, we have to think of them as not sort of a species that's only adapted to super cold or anything like that. They were actually incredibly flexible. And the Neanderthals of those warmer worlds, what did they experience? So, interglacial world, like today, we're talking about forests really in Europe, certainly in northern Europe. And the holly and ivy are two species that are really strong indicators for warm conditions. So you have to imagine Neanderthals walking through woodlands, encountering animals like fallow deer, that's a warm species really, and even sort of big unexpected things like hippopotamus, even up in Yorkshire. But the plants that they were surrounded by is something that, we pay attention to hunting, but the plants are really important for them too. We don't know if they actually used Hollywood for anything, but what we do know is another interglacial species that they did use was yew wood. And we have a spear from a German site, which was made in yew wood, and other artefacts from southern Europe, also in yew, digging sticks these are, and boxwood as well. So the Neanderthals were quite familiar with a range of different plants, and no matter what kind of world they lived in, if it was cold or warm, that was part of what they were sort of well aware of. And in some of the colder periods, we know that they're using pine and spruce, quite Christmassy, for spears as well. So coming to the end of our little tour, what happened to the Neanderthals? That was a very out of tune Coventry carol. I did warn you it'd be primary school level. So the Neanderthals did disappear about 40,000 years ago, but we found out a decade ago that they didn't entirely vanish. And we know that there's interbreeding, but genetics, interbreeding, admixture, they're all quite sort of dehumanizing terms. And really what we're talking about for the end of the Neanderthals is about emotion. It's about babies, family, grandchildren, and that is the source of the DNA that is the legacy in most living people today. So the Neanderthals are still here in a very real way, connecting us to that deep past. And whether you go for winter solstice or Christmas, there is the side of it. It's cold, it's the end of the year, it's a bit bleak, but on the other hand, it's about new beginnings and hope and renewal. So I want to leave it at that. The Neanderthals are still here among us.
Rebecca Wragg-Sykes. There's just so many, like the number of different ideas in that book and about art and ritual and culture. And then there's this wonderful, I forget, he's actually used in the book of Clan of the Cave Bear, who is this, the remains of this Neanderthal that's found that was basically, he'd kind of lost an arm and had some form of amputation, which actually meant that he still was able to survive. And he kind of had, his head was beaten in and he didn't have, his hearing was, and it was this really, it's a very, Shanadar 1, that's it, Shanadar 1, which is the remains of a Neanderthal, which shows that those who were not necessarily able to keep up physically were nevertheless supported by a community. And I mean, there's so many rich stories in that. Anyway, now we are going to, as I mentioned, culture. This is our first jazz proper crossover musical experimentation, I think, Steve, isn't it?
No, sorry. I think we're going over to, that's a bit later.
Gecko. Are we not doing Gecko?
Yeah, Gecko, yeah.
Yeah.
You're counting that as...
I thought you were playing with him.
I am playing with him, yeah.
This is not going to work out. We're 2 hours in and we can't communicate. So you will be collaborating with him.
I will be. So I misunderstood.
Is that going to be mimed, really? Is this whole thing a kind of setup?
Yeah, the whole... I'm not even here. This is a hologram.
It's like Jan and Dean all over again. Well done if you got that reference to surf music. Many of you may well not have done. This is something that Brian Cox says to me all the time. I don't know why you mention anything about the films you like. No one's ever heard of them. Anyway, so we are now going to do playing live here and playing live in his home. We have someone who's done the last, I think, 2 or 3 shows, and he's a really wonderful, one of those musicians which just brings a tremendous level of kind of chutzpah and joy, and it is Gecko. So hopefully, Gecko, are you live? Can we see Gecko? Oh, right, here we are. So with Gecko, Steve, I leave it to you.
Hi, this is Gecko. Thanks to Robin and Cosmic Shambles for having me. This is a song about Laika, the dog that was sent to space in the 1950s on a one-way mission. I'm going to the stars tonight. I don't know exactly how, and I don't know why. Grew up on cold Moscow streets. These poors, they saw all kinds of trouble. Scrapping with puppies over something to eat. This tough looks rough, but you can't knock the muzzle these stray days. Wasting away as we waste away days. The there must be more to life than this. I'm going to the stars tonight. I don't know exactly how, and I don't know why, but when I go, just don't leave me behind. Men in strange suits scoop me off the roadside, give me free food. How was I to know I being selected for a secret mission? Took me to all kinds of uncomfortable fittings. Dogs don't wear hats. And there were other dogs there, all in training. It was like a montage of a particularly strange film. And every day my cage got a bit smaller, and other dogs, they got the cooler, but their services were no longer required. Till the only dog left was I. I'm going to the stars tonight. I don't know exactly how, and I don't know why. When I go, just don't leave me behind. That just about brings us to the present day. Tonight's the night they say I'm gonna elevate. They put me on a weird diet and keep pointing that strange diagram. Say I'm going higher than anyone has ever been. Distant canine, drifting in space-time. Just need a bit of space, I'm not used to this pressure. Surely there's somebody better qualified. But I guess the sooner I go, sooner I can come home. Going to the stars tonight. Don't know exactly how, and I don't know why. I used to say there must be more to life than this, but it's the normal life I miss. There must be more to life than this, but it's the normal life I miss. When I go, just don't leave me behind. There we go, that's Leica. This next one is called Soaring. Also, I think that Steve is playing some music I can't hear along with that, but thank you, my friend. 7 years old, running through a field. I'm a city boy, but I like how it feels. I'm not gonna stop, I'm alive and I'm free, just like a bird, unless mum says it's tea. So I took off my shoes, took off my socks, running bare feet, I'm hopscotching rocks. Look out for stingers, they'll hurt your bare knees. Then you have to stop, trying to dock leaf, which can take ages. Then into the woods, surrounded by trees, something appears I've never seen. It's big and it's golden, an extraordinary bird. It's one of a kind, I've discovered the first. It's a bit like a parrot, we don't have those here. But as soon as I saw it, it just disappeared. But I can never forget, such a wonderful sight. Turn myself around, ran back inside. Call the local museum, in front of the paper. Do I need an agent? I'll worry about that later. We'll make it on news round, be the best day I've had. Be the talk of the playground, first I'll tell Dad. He said be unpleasant, but that bird's not a discovery, it's a pheasant. But I'd be soaring if I just saw him again. Yeah, I'd be soaring if I just saw him again. Now I'm just old, at least that's what they say. Sit in this chair, I'm too tired to play. They call this a home, but I know it's not mine. Don't do much running, I've run out of time. But once in a week, these girls come and sing, breaks up the day and helps me to think. I drift off to the notes, I don't catch all the words. In my head I run and remember that bird. I'd be soaring if I just saw him again. Yeah, I'd be soaring if I just saw him again. And then, as if by magic, what seemed like 1,000 birds burst through the windows into the communal lounge. The room is awash with gasps and bright, beautiful colour. By night, each game bird had been individually saved from a local shooting field. It was highly illegal, a cunning plan compiled by one ingenuitive grandchild. And now I'm soaring, soaring again, a cacophony of squawks, and everybody gets up to dance. Now I'm soaring, soaring again. One particularly fine specimen is currently perched on Agnes's head. Soaring, soaring again. A pair of females attempt to eat a series of Scrabble letters that spell out inedible. Triple word score. Soaring, soaring again. Jeff, the care worker, mutters he's not seen anything like it in these parts. Not since the Strictly final. Now I'm soaring, soaring again. Thanks so much. I've been Gecko. Good luck on your crazy 24-hour endeavour. Loads of love.
Thank you very much. Gecko's fantastic. I think he's something like Gecko Official on Twitter. Go and look up and find out more stuff that he does because they're really beautiful albums. And thank you very much to Steve as well. There are, as we said, coming up a little bit later on in about an hour and a quarter's time, I think we're going to do the first bit of robotic experimentation, the kind of the Turing test of whether we need real jazz musicians or whether robots can ultimately take over.
Well, it's actually combining the two. This is the exciting bit. It's combining humans and robots, which can't possibly go wrong in any sense, can it? I'm sure.
Well, it always starts off in all dystopian jazz novels. It always starts off with you believing that the robots are merely your jazz helpers, and then slowly, as they reach Ornette Coleman's points of sentience, that's when the whole thing falls apart for the humans.
I mean, my brain has very much fallen apart trying to get them all working. So, it sort of started already.
I think the nice thing is there's a high percentage chance it's going to go wrong, and that's good science.
Very good science.
Fail again, fail better. That's a lot of what science is about, failure, and that doesn't get taught enough. So thank you very much for helping us out.
You're very welcome.
Your flawed jazz experiment.
Thanks very much for watching. I suggest you immediately go out and buy the books of Jim Al-Khalili and Rebecca Wragg-Sykes and Mark Watson's novel as well, and some of Gecko's music. But if you're thinking, well, I've still got a little bit of money left, then please do support us on Patreon as well, the Cosmic Shambles Network. It's how we fund ourselves now because we can't do live gigs for the time being. So if you're able to fund us, go to patreon.com. That will be fantastic. Thank you, and I hope to see you again.